Hi, welcome to a series of video sessions. This is the second one where we're going to be having a little look at the .B curricula and reinforcing something that we often say on training, but we've perhaps not had the resources to support, which is that you know the students that you're working with, and it's really important that you make the .B curriculum relevant for the young people. So we've made the resources editable, which, as you know, those of you that have trained with us, hasn't always been the case. So we've opened it up so that you can include your own examples, ideas of the way that you can bring the learning to life for those students. We're also aware in the background here that teachers of the .B programme will have a variety of experience, of expertise. You might be working in different settings to the norm and have different resources available to you, as well as different guidelines that you follow in your setting, especially perhaps in relation to the use of technology and what you've got access to in terms of what you can use with the students, but also what the guidelines are around how you use that technology. However, after all of that, the learning is still the learning that's there in the curricula. It's tried and tested, and we know it goes down really well with students. So it's not about changing the actual learnings in the programme. It's taking that learning and just making it relevant for who you have in front of you. So Richard, as many of you know, is the founder of the Mindfulness in Schools project alongside others. And he has been continuing to teach .B for over a decade now. And Richard, you've changed it quite a bit yourself, haven't you, as you've been delivering the programme?
Yeah, I mean, when I look in my folder of .B lessons, I've got so many versions of every lesson because I think every time you're teaching it, you're adapting it to when you're teaching it in the year, you're adapting it to who you've got in front of you, and you learn ways that seem to connect better with the kinds of audience you're working with. So yes, I mean, it's quite considerably changed in places.
Yeah, and so we're looking at the introduction in particular in this session, and we'll be looking at subsequent lessons in other videos. How about this session? What would you say the key pieces of learning are, or kind of key points that you always include, even if you change the way that you deliver it?
So, Faiy, as they say on Blue Peter, here's one I prepared earlier, because I think there are three things in this lesson that are particularly significant, I suppose, or at least that I make sure I have still. I suppose the consistent elements are that you are wondering what's interesting the kids in front of you. You know, we talk about possibilities all of the time. You don't know until you meet them and until they share with you in however way you do that, what especially might engage the kids that you're working with. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I still find that the hands clapping exercise, getting the nerve endings tingling in the hands, is a great way of helping young people access body sensation. If you're introducing the concepts of attention and body sensation, clapping hands still works very well. And then the last thing, I still find Kung Fu Panda is a fantastic way of bringing up how stress manifests, the achievement ethic of so much of the pressure that we put on young people today, how they compare themselves with others, and then finally the great words of Uguay, yesterday's history, tomorrow's a mystery, today is a gift, and that's why it's called the present, because then you can connect that back to the fact that when they were noticing the physical sensations in their hands, then hopefully they may have experienced, even if it's only for a few seconds, what it's like to have your attention in the present moment with body sensation, which kind of helps them in lessons to come. Is that sort of more or less clear?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always think about this session as the session where I'm actually trying to really help them understand how they can practically use it, so that I get a bit of buy-in, that they want to come along and do the whole programme from having come into this introduction. In the context that I've taught it in, it's been come and do this session and see if you want to do it. So I've had voluntary people come onto the training that way.
Yeah, I mean, the way I probably the greatest change I've made to the material we give out in the training is that in the training, we share something that looks a bit like this. We have the little characters, which I still think work really well on paper, and they're quite generic in some ways. They don't carry as much baggage, perhaps, as actual images do. But what I found actually more helpful is to present lots of different images to them and have a dialogue with them about what that image might represent, which in itself gets the conversations going, because they could do that in pairs, for example. And then after that, I would ask them to actually share anonymously which of those images particularly speaks to them. And that's actually been really, really helpful. Because in fact, even actually recently, the last one I did, I had one class which really focused on the Harlan and seemed to be more interested in sport. But I had another one that focused much more on this one, which seemed to be much more about stress. And actually what was really interesting is that correlated with another thing I sometimes do, which is anonymously ask them, how are you doing right now? You know, are you terrible, feeling terrible, slightly anxious, okay, pretty good, thriving, or up and down? And what was really interesting is the ones that had voted more for Harlan seemed to be up at the, you know, feeling better, feeling okay, I suppose more okay. And interestingly, the other one, who were a different year group, which was also interesting, they were year 13, who I was teaching, and they are obviously looking at like what comes next in their lives, university applications and stuff. They were much more down the stressed end. And so it was interesting to see those two things correlate.
Yeah, it was really good to see kind of the images that you were using there. And I suppose, you know, as you were saying, you sort of knew your group, and so you knew what sorts of things might be useful or helpful for them. And I think that really goes along with this idea of know the student. So even if you're an external teacher visiting, if you've got that background information through talking to the pastoral leads in the school, or any way in which you can get background information on the students before you go in to do that session, might give you an idea of the sorts of things that they would find it helpful to use it for.
Yeah.
So absolutely. And I suppose, I mean, I noticed that you had some religious images there. Was that because you had a group that were particularly interested in religion?
Yeah, well, actually, not so much a group that is interested in religion, and those images don't score very highly. It's more that I tend to find that, and I think others might find that they have more of one denomination than another denomination or another religion. And my school, there tends to be a higher percentage of Christian children, and I don't want audiences of faith to think that this might be some sort of, you know, meditation Buddhism by the back door. On the other hand, I don't want to deny that it has that heritage. I want to just be open about it. So there's that one picture of the young monk, but then there's the one picture of the Christian nun, actually, who's a, you know, early medieval meditator, Teresa of Avila. Just to say, look, I actually reference when I'm explaining those, I say that every religious tradition in the world has some aspect of contemplation, prayer, meditation, stillness, silence. Those are really important parts. So it's not that that's going to be the most popular, but I want to reassure people who might feel that they're coming into a background that is in some way, in a context that is in some way in conflict with their faith.
Yeah, and equally, I guess, I mean, I'm just thinking that where I lived in a lot of the schools that I've worked in, it would have been kind of Hinduism or Islam, you know, having images that would relate to that. It would be something that would stir some interest because of the background of the young people I've worked with. So, yeah, interesting to kind of hear that.
And Faiy, that's a good, if I can just interrupt, that's where using your own images is key.
Yeah.
You know, that Teresa of Avila image would, I mean, to be honest, I have to tell the kids here who that is, but obviously I've chosen that image deliberately because it's of one faith. And if you had a different faith as a majority in your school, you would use that image, or two images, or three images, or you might choose none at all for other reasons. It's absolutely what you think works with the kids you're teaching.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about, I mean, I know that in the previous video, so just to recap back to that, you were mentioning about what we're doing isn't therapy, it's not therapeutic. So when it comes to things around stress, for example, which you were saying was one of the images where you had quite a lot of people kind of go for that. It's not always as well necessarily the case that we're talking about severe mental health. It can be, as you named, that they've got their exams coming up and they're feeling stressed, etc. So just really important, I think, to differentiate around that, in the sense that if you had students who were really struggling, then they would perhaps not be doing the session because it might not be right for them, or that there would be a lot more extra support from other places within the school to kind of help them with those difficulties.
And that's something we will come to in lesson 1, about how making sure after a practice there is some way of getting feedback on anybody who is actually finding it significantly unpleasant, if you like. And actually there could be individuals in the classroom for whom even dipping them lightly in mindfulness, could have, an adverse response, which you want to just pick up early. Unlikely to be strongly adverse because the practices are so short, but even if it's just a little bit, you might just want to keep an eye on it.
Yeah, and I always think that, I've very rarely had that happen in all of my teaching of .B, but I think it's really good to have the awareness that it could happen for a young person, and have that lens in the way that you deliver the programme, and like you say, have kind of an ear out or an eye out for anyone that might struggle and what support would be available for them in your.
Just one last thing before we close. There's one other slide I tend to try and show, because otherwise I feel they don't really know why it's called .B. And that is, I tend to show that after Kung Fu Panda, after Hands, at the end of the lesson, almost as a tease for the rest of the course, I say, you might be wondering why it's called .B. And I explain this idea of stopping, of noticing what's going on, feeling your feet on the floor, feeling your breathing, and B. And I sometimes I just end on that as it seems to, it sort of ties a little bow at the end of the first lesson in a way which I find is helpful, and you hope leaves them feeling curious about what's to come.
Yeah, brilliant. Just very, very quickly, just to say that one of the things we'd be encouraging people to do in terms of using other examples is to just do a bit of searching at the time to see who currently might be out there practicing mindfulness, and include those examples. And I was doing some searching and I came across CJ Uja, who I'd not heard of before, as someone, a mindfulness practitioner who's an athlete, a UK athlete. Smith, who's a rugby player, is
yeah.
And then Raheem Sterling is more kind of well known as a footballer who practices meditation. And then music-wise, Kendrick Lamar, but I think quite a few people have heard of Kendrick Lamar practicing as well. But just, this is the beauty of the PowerPoints being editable, is that you can just add in different people each time you come to deliver it.
Yeah, exactly. Use what's most relevant.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely what you're looking to do.
Fantastic.
Great.
Thank you very much for joining me for this.
No problem. I'll see you for the next one.
Yep, see you for the next one. Thank you.